Thank you for joining us for Redesign Done Right, and I am thrilled to introduce our presenter, Voltaire Santos Moran, co-founder and co-owner of mStoner. Voltaire works with mStoner client teams to forge and sustain transformative, memorable, and incredibly effective partnerships. He shapes all aspects of mStoner's individual projects, overall planning, and company-wide management. A natural storyteller, Voltaire enjoys teaching others how to tell stories and using his expertise in information architecture, content strategy, and governance to move institutions from a project mindset to a process mindset. Current clients include the University of North Dakota, Elmhurst College, and the UC Berkeley School of Public Health. Voltaire, I'll turn this session over to you. Let's get started.
Excellent, Mallory. Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for being here today. So as we get started, let me be very clear about my goal for the next 55 minutes or so. I really would love at the end of this to have you be able to say that I've provided useful and actionable information and ideas for your upcoming redesign project. I know a lot of you have been through a process like this before, so in some cases I think I'll be affirming what you think you already know, and in other cases hopefully I'll be reminding you of what you've forgotten. So let's get started. We've got a number of topics that we want to cover today. The first is justifying a redesign, followed by setting goals, identifying blind spots, crafting a killer RFP, managing your external expectations, and then, internal expectations, and then moving from project to process. So before we get started with those topics, I do have one question for y'all. What's the biggest issue you're facing in redesigning your website? Mallory's just queued up a poll, and let's see what you all say. Please
Right.
Make a choice.
Yeah, the poll is live. So far, I can see deciding who gets to decide seems to be one of the popular responses so far. And as this poll stays open longer and longer, more and more people are selecting that. Close second, it looks like, is going to be all the pages full. All the pages. All right, let's end the poll and see what the results are. All right, sharing them out now. Everybody should be able to see the results, including you.
All right. Yeah, all the crappy pages, unrealistic expectations about timeline and budget, and deciding who get to decide are the top three. Here's the funny thing. I've been working on website redesigns for almost 20 years now, and there are a lot of things that have changed and become either simpler or more complex. And there are a lot of things that remain the same, and these things have remained the same over all these years. The issue of content strategy, content curation, the issues of governance, and then the idea that everything that you do on the web comes for free, and it is cheap and it is easy, right? All right, so let's use that as a background for our discussion today. So let's talk first about justifying a redesign. And I love this quote from Peter Drucker: if you want something new, you have to stop doing something old. So I want to share 4 points from our most recent research that helps to build the case for a website redesign. So the first piece of information is that the website remains the single most influential resource that a college or university provides that teens use throughout the search and selection process. Now, let me be clear and unpack this a little bit. This is about the types of communications that colleges and universities provide. That includes the website, print materials, social communications, email campaigns. So as I show this graph, you will see that among all the different types of information, the college website remains the same throughout all 4 stages of what we call the process of a complex sale. So the beginning of the process is research, and then people move into applying, accepting, deciding, and then finally committing. And that you'll see that the college website remains consistently the highest used resource of information throughout all phases. Now, the reason I wanted to make clear that it was about information and resources and communications that the college provides is that the other statistic that remains the same and has remained the same over all these years is that the website is second only to the college visit in helping perspectives to identify the school that they want to apply to and the school they want to go to. So let me share a second piece of information. So in our Myth-Busting Websites 2016 survey, what we found are the big 4 things that prospectives look for at the very beginning of the search process are academic programs, visiting, costs and aid, and student life. Third piece of information, intuitive navigation and the ability to find information remain, over all these years, the most consistently highly rated attributes for a great college website. And the final piece of research that I want to share is that pictures of campus are as important as program rankings. Program rankings and pictures of campus were neck to neck in terms of how important is this information to you, and that in the early part of the process, pictures of campus actually outrank program information by about 1 to 2 percentage points. So using those pieces of information, I want to move into 6 key reasons for a redesign. So first key reason for a redesign is your application or yield numbers need a boost. So if what you're seeing is that your applications are either sort of steady or declining, or your yield numbers are steady or declining, you can definitely tie this back in some way, shape, or form to your website. And some of this might be a usability issue. Some of this might be process issue or content issue or interface issue. Chances are that if you haven't redesigned your site in a while, it's a mix of all of these things. So one of the things that you can do in order to boost these important numbers is to relaunch your site. So a true story, St. Louis University, after relaunching their website, enrolled a historic freshman class in 2016 and attributed the new website that really reinforced their brand and encouraged conversion and was optimized for mobile as one of the key reasons for this. Key reason number 2, your academic program page traffic is relatively low. So if you've got low traffic to what are arguably the most important pages of your website, that indicates that you've got significant opportunities to showcase this information in a much better and more vital way. Let me give you an example of this. Rush University, when they launched their website, saw 2,000 new admissions inquiries in the first month. And the reason that I think that happened is because one of the main things that Rush did, and we as their partner did as part of this process, is that we focused very specifically on each of the academic programs. We highlighted the key information that students were looking for based on our understanding of their sort of mental model process and what was most important for each program. And each program was very specific. And then we finally made sure that each of these pages were optimized for conversion. Let's talk about a third reason for a redesign. It's been 5 years or more since your last relaunch. So chances are, if it's been that long, your interface is showing its age, your mobile design is likely still a retrofit. And the way I think you can tell, or most people can tell, that the mobile site was a retrofit project is when you take a look at the mobile menu and it's basically one long list with everything of equal weight, probably alphabetical, requiring 2 or 3 scrolls. And then finally, if it's been 5 or more years, your CMS might be a version or 2 behind the current version. That was pretty much what Elmhurst College was facing, and their priorities for their website were mobile optimized navigation, a new streamlined IA, and a new content management system. Key reason number 4, it's been 3 years or more since your last content audit. So organic sprawl is the term that I use for a decentralized web environment where people are allowed to publish, but without any sort of governance. And by governance, I mean accountability, I mean editorial review, I mean workflow and approval. So if it's been that long, chances are your site is going to have a number of redundant pages. It's probably going to have out-of-date information. It's going to have pages that no longer have an owner, either at the department or office level or at an individual level, and it's time to clean house. And that's something that Mills College did when they went through their site. They hadn't done a content audit in a very, very long time. And so one of the things that they were able to accomplish in their website was a lean, clean structure that was focused specifically on their prospects while moving information for their internal audiences to other pages. The principle of separating internal from external information is foundational to website design, because the idea is that if you crowd a lot of information, if you try to concatenate information for disparate audiences in one place and try to serve them equally, you will inevitably serve none of them well. So being able to separate that internal from external information also allows you to make sure that you're serving your audiences well, getting to them to the information they need, and really optimizing each of those pages for the key actions that you want that specific audience to take. Fifth reason for a redesign is your page load performance times are poor. So performance impacts search engine optimization, and performance matters to site visitors, especially on mobile. So if what you're finding is that your page load times are extremely high, that indicates that there are at very least some good digital hygiene measures you should take, but more likely that it's time for you to take a look at streamlining and redoing your site. So Medill, when they redid their site recently, they were able to get their page load times down to 3 seconds per page, which is a good benchmark standard to aim for. And then the sixth and final redesign reason that I'll give in the context of this webinar is that your pages aren't compliant with accessibility standards. So complaints and lawsuits surrounding accessibility on education sites have risen steeply in the last year. In fact, there was an article in, I think, the New York Times in October of 2017 about how the lawsuits against colleges and universities basically doubled in the last year. And I think that more and more institutions are coming under scrutiny for this. Wheaton College was in the same place, and they used their website redesign as a way to shift from a reactive to a proactive accessibility approach. So if it's been a while since you've taken a look at accessibility, or you know that this is an issue, that should be a key driver for reworking your site sooner than later. And one thing I promised in our webinar description is that I would suggest 4 things that you can do while you are preparing yourself for a larger website relaunch. The first is a usability study. It will give you firsthand feedback. It's a small footprint. It's actionable information. We're talking about 8 to 10 individuals, half-hour sessions. This is something that you can do either internally or hire an external team to do, but it does provide a lot of really great information and also a lot of ammunition. If one of the things that you need to do is build the case to leadership that your site is not representing your institution well, there is nothing better than a clip from a website usability session of some prospective student talking about how bad the site looks to help people understand at an emotional level what needs to happen. Second thing that we suggest is a site checkup. Now this, unlike a usability study, is done by an outside company or an outside individual. And it's supposed to provide a broader view across multiple facets. So a good site checkup will have information or feedback on content, design, information architecture, the things that a site user would look at, but instead of being firsthand information, it basically is someone providing a synthetic view. It will give you some immediate wins, things that you can adjust right now that will make a difference on your website. And then it also provides a roadmap for a larger redesign project. A third thing you can do is perform an accessibility audit, and that will allow you to identify specific issues on your site that you need to address. It also provides a foundation for ongoing training. So the more you know what the accessibility issues are, the more you're able to develop training for your site editors and publishers. So for instance, if you find out that one of the big issues is that no one puts alt tags in, then you know that that's something that you need to focus on. I remember doing a Writing for the Web workshop once where we were talking about the basics of accessibility, and I was explaining the point of an alt tag, and someone in the class said, "Oh, that's what an alt tag for. I just kept putting in pictures of people." So final thing in an accessibility audit, it's an input for a larger redesign. So it'll give you some really good information for that large redesign initiative. And then the fourth and final thing I would suggest is get your analytics in order. This will provide a baseline so that you can better set goals for the site relaunch. It'll help you to develop a meaningful metrics dashboard. I mean, one of the things that I find with analytics is people can make a lot of really bad decisions based on good data. So one of the things that is important to do is figure out what the meaningful metrics are and cut through all the noise and develop a visual dashboard for people where the information and what people should be drawing from that information, that insight, are more readily clear than they sometimes can be. And this also establishes the beginning of what we call data-driven decision-making. The idea that we take the decisions outside of the realm of, I don't like that shade of green, or the dean thinks that this is important to put on the homepage, to what is it that is going to best serve our audiences? What is it that our site visitors need and want, and how do we make the site, or how do we get our site to best support that journey? All right, let's talk about setting goals. Now, normally when you talk about websites, there are the goals that everyone talks about, which are Google Analytics goals around page views, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to broaden out the goal setting for this because I think that a website redesign has the ability to impact a number of different things. I love this quote from Venus. I don't focus what I'm up against or focus on what I'm up against. I focus on my goals and I try to ignore the rest. So let's talk about 6 different areas in which you might consider setting goals for this website redesign process. The first, obviously, is engagement. It's what I was talking about a little bit ago. This idea of stickiness on key pages, how much people are using the site tools and the really cool functionality that you've built in. So for instance, if you have a program finder, how well is that, that being used by people? And then interactions with interactivity. We all make a lot of investments in things like video or interactive infographics, and it's important to be able to measure what the value of those pieces or those components of the site is. Or value, yeah, value is. So other things to think of. Conversion. Here we talk about the big 4, the request more information, contact a counselor, visit our campus, or apply now. But the conversion goals could also include things like talking with a faculty member, meeting with a coach. A number of our clients have faculty and coaches highly involved in the recruitment process. And so maybe as you're designing your pages, one of the key things that you want them to be able to do is connect with someone in the classroom or someone on the field who is going to be able to help to provide the information they need and help to build the relationship with that prospect. Other things to consider would be signing up for an event and registering for class. Beyond that, we look at goals related to insight. And these are goals about page views, unique visitors, traffic sources, devices, locations, bounce rates, and exit pages in a multi-step process. And beyond that, we talk about efficiency. So one of the things that you might consider or should consider as part of this website is what internal changes and improvements can this website help you to make? So 3 things here. Number 1 is the reduction of repetitive requests. So the emails or the phone calls that come in asking for the same information again and again and again, that's pretty much an indication that it's hard to find on your website or through the search function of your website. So maybe one of the goals that you can set is reducing the sort of traffic that you get for those questions because you've provided that sort of information. I remember when we were working with a community college close to Chicago, that one of the criteria for the project was, how low can we get the inquiries to the webmaster? And one of the things that we found is that the site was so easy and clear in the way that it was constructed that the questions really dropped off significantly. The second efficiency that I would encourage is this increase in high-touch, high-value interactions. So if we consider repetitive requests as high-touch, low-value, these high-touch, high-value interactions are more the interactions where you want to be spending your time. So let me give you an example of that comes from my background in development. Uh, at a certain point, when you are cultivating a major donor, you don't want them on the website anymore. You want them talking with a major gifts officer or a planned gifts officer. So one of the things I like to do when we are designing websites for giving is making sure that depending on the section of the site you're on, that pass off to that high touch, high value interaction or to that person is really easy, really clear, and really encouraged. So one of the things that you can set a goal for is the idea that those key relationship builders should increase, those pass-offs should increase. And then finally, improvements to internal process. Now, the website might not necessarily solve internal process problems, but a website project can help identify them. So I'll give you one example from the work that we did with a graduate school. We found out that one of the biggest pain points was not related to the website for a prospective graduate student. It was related to the distance or the time between an offer for acceptance arrived and the financial aid package arrived, which could be somewhere between 6 to 8 weeks. And during that time, this grad school would lose their best people to other institutions who were able to provide either more money or a financial aid package with more alacrity than they were. So they realized that one of the things they needed to do internally is find a way to narrow that gap of time. All right, two other sets of goals that I'd love for you to consider in this website redesign process is the goal of collaboration. So one of the things that a website project should help you to do is to increase the amount of content collaboration and content sharing that happens. And it also, at the same time, reduce the number of pages that have duplicative information. So that third bullet point here, authoritative sources of information, one of the goals that you can have for the site is to narrow the redundancy significantly to the point where people know who is responsible for the content, for instance, related to costs and aid, who is responsible for the content related to the process of applying. So this is a really great opportunity to help break down silos that happen in institutions. And then finally, key goals to include could be research and reputation, and that is brand awareness and brand perception. And you can get to this sort of information, actually measuring this information through qualitative and quantitative research. You could get this sort of information from a simple usability study post-launch. You could also get this from social listening. And if you haven't explored mStoner, you might check them out because they offer a really great, great social listening product. All right, let's identify some blind spots. I love this quote from Tolstoy: happy families are all alike and every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. So the funny thing about this quote is when I first heard it, I thought that what the quote meant was that all happy families are really boring and unhappy families are really interesting in their own ways. And what I found out is that's actually completely wrong. There is something called the Anna Karenina principle, apparently. This idea that a deficiency in any one of a number of factors dooms an endeavor to failure. And conversely, a successful endeavor is one where every deficiency has been avoided. Fascinating. And that's a really great background to our top 10 common mistakes that people make with website projects. So, number 10, treating a project primarily as a technology effort. Technology is obviously a key component, but technology should not drive your decisions. It should not be the main decision that you're making within a website redesign project, and it should not limit your ideas and your creativity. Number 9, viewing the project primarily as a design endeavor. Design, again, is a really important component, but beautiful design plus usability plus content, plus technology, plus governance is really the equation for a really good and holistic website redesign project. Number 8, taking an overly aggressive approach to the project timeline. I love this quote: no Gantt chart has ever survived an encounter with reality. I mean, honestly, you can do any number of things to a Gantt chart when you're planning out a project to get a site relaunch down to 3 months. And I can almost guarantee that it is not going to work once you try to put it in place. So having a realistic approach to what the timeline is makes a lot of sense, and it'll save you from a lot of heartache. People sometimes ask me what the typical timeline is. And I would say that if what you are talking about in a website redesign is the marketing critical pages, normally about 300, 400 pages, in a new design, possibly in a new content management system, then start to finish, you're talking about 9 to 11 months. Now, if you are talking about moving every single final page within a very large university site into the content management system, the templates, what you're looking at is a phased 2 to 3 year project. If what you're looking at is a very small site that needs to go live before the doomsday clock runs out on the content management system that can no longer support and has basically been sunsetted, you can do a website launch in 5 months. There are trade-offs to be made, and it's important to note that phased launches are more expensive, but being realistic about what you are able to do at the outset is the better part of valor. Number 7, having unrealistic budget expectations. So yeah, I think that at a certain point, people expected that web projects would get cheaper and become more of a commodity. And that honestly hasn't happened. I think because the amount of work that's involved hasn't really changed, and the amount of expertise that you want from people working on your site has not changed. It's also because that websites have become a lot more complex than they used to be. So setting realistic budget expectations is, I think, important at the very outset to ensure success. Number 6, not having the proper leadership in place. Having the support of the president, to me, is essential, because that means that she can make this website project a priority. And you also need a champion that has authority, visibility, credibility, and a high degree of trust in you and your team. So if either of those things are missing, I think that the project could encounter some obstacles and could get bogged down in institutional politics or lose institutional budget. Number 5, neglecting analytics again. So I don't think I've ever had a client say that they're doing so much awesome stuff with unified analytics and it's driving their decision making and their priorities. Normally what happens is this. People will say to us, we have the tracking code in place, but we haven't ever really gotten the chance to take a look at any of the analytics, much less draw conclusions from them. So we relaunched the website with them. We put all of the codes in place. The situation is still the same, right? There's no one to actually look at the data and make some decisions on an ongoing basis about what it is the data is telling them. So this next site redesign that you're looking at is really the chance for you to say, all right, we really need to make sure that analytics is central to what we're doing now and moving forward. 4th, still avoiding your governance pay points. Deciding who gets to decide is ultimately going to be easier than avoiding the conversation altogether. But a lot of institutions just shy away from this idea of governance. They don't want to talk about who owns what, and they don't want to put in place policies, procedures, standards for training, all of the things that make a website in a decentralized environment actually function. Number 3, having fuzzy personalization thoughts. So personalization has become big again, and it is an incredibly powerful tool. We've gotten a couple of RFPs lately where they say, what we'd like is a really immersive, personalized environment where someone can log in and have a dashboard. And when we push a little on that and ask, well, what are you thinking personalization can do? Well, we're not sure. And I think that's a fair answer, but it also means that you need to figure out how personalization is supposed to work. A lot of times when we point to personalization, we point to Amazon and we say that Amazon is the paragon of personalization. And to For certain things, it is. But Amazon is retail. And what we are talking about with prospective students is a complex sale that goes on for, it's a process that normally takes several months. With community colleges we've worked with, we found that sometimes prospective students will churn through the process for several years before making a decision. And so one of the questions that we ask ourselves and our clients when we talk about personalization is, what is meaningful for personalization? There's a lot of stuff you can personalize, but what will actually be helpful and useful, and when will that be useful through the prospective student journey? Second to last is expecting photography to come cheap and easy. Painful reality is all the photographs in your digital asset management system aren't as useful for your website project as you think they are. And then the final on this list is disregarding the need for content strategy up front. And I think this ties back really well to what you all reported at the beginning of this webinar, this idea that content continues to be a big pain point. And I can guarantee that leaving the words for later is the best possible way to ensure a hot mess of a project. All right, let's move on to crafting a killer RFP. So I was having dinner with a friend last night, and she said, you know, I quoted that line from Grey's Anatomy. And I said, oh, choose me, pick me, love me. And we both laughed because absolutely everyone quotes this, right? I kind of get weepy every time I quote it. I still love that episode. All right, so let's talk about the true story that agencies hate RFPs. And many agencies, or at least the better agencies, I'm finding, responding to fewer and fewer of them. Why? Or what turns agencies off to RFPs? The first is litigious language. When you get an RFP that makes it very clear that you're viewing this as a vendor relationship and not a partner relationship, that's a red flag. RFPs that don't have a scope of work that matches up with the details of the document, true story, is also a red flag. When you're not able to have a conversation with the people who are running the project or get clarification on things within the RFP, that is a red flag. And when RFPs come with unnecessarily restrictive requirements, that also is something that makes agencies think twice about responding. And really what you're looking for here as someone trying to engage a partner is to find the right fit, right? Find an agency that you are going to love working with. So let me offer some insight from Gettysburg College. They recently went through an RFP process, and they did 4 really great things that helped them to land on a wonderful partner relationship. The first is they did some preliminary groundwork. They engaged the campus community for at least a couple of months, I think, before the selection process began, and collected feedback from people about needs and expectations. They had a project committee, and that project committee went through, I think, 2 days of an intensive workshop to align their expectations and to map out the committee's joint vision for how the project would go. They put out a 4-page RFP, which is blessedly brief for an RFP. Some RFPs we get are more than 110 pages long, and 90% of that is rules and stipulations, or rules and conditions. And then finally, they narrowed the number of prospective partners to which they sent this RFP. They did a lot of research at the very beginning on the different firms that they might partner with, and they chose each firm for a very specific set of skills. So the portfolios varied widely, the size of the companies varied widely, and that gave them a really great opportunity to decide what was going to be the most important to them. So elements of a great RFP, 9 things: summary of an institutional landscape, clear scope of work without being too prescriptive. Most people will say that there is a sort of budget or a timeline sort of ceiling. So an indication of your priorities and what the flexibilities are. So if timeline has to give or budget has to give, which one would give? Required information, what it is that you need from each of the companies responding. budget ranges and timeline expectations, specific evaluation points. So if, for instance, higher education is not important to you, if what you want is a firm that hasn't really done much with higher education, then that's something that you need to make clear. But if it is of value, something that you want a lot of experience in, that's also something to stipulate in the RFP. Any sort of third-party systems requiring integration should be called out up front. Any web properties that are not included in the work. And then whenever possible, and I know that this is not possible for state institutions where procurement runs the process, but if you can provide a contact, if you can provide any sort of pre-bidder conference, that really helps agencies to determine whether it's a good fit project-wise to try to respond to. All right, a few more topics need to cover before we open up for questions and answers. So managing internal expectations. Favorite quote from Oprah: every single person you will ever meet shares a common desire. Do you see me? Do you hear me? Do you, or does what I say mean anything to you? And what I find with projects like this is it's about inclusion. It's about giving people the opportunity to be part of the process. And so here's some suggestions where you can engage the community. So in the discovery sessions or in the pre-selection sessions, bringing people in and having people provide feedback, getting certain stakeholders involved in experience mapping, having people review the strategies or participate in card sorting, labeling, or usability sessions. Some of our clients do town hall meetings where they give people the opportunity to come in and take a look at deliverables, say design, and ask questions. Pre-launch, I think that every institution should have a series of educational communications planned out, because with most relaunches, what will happen is that things will move, things will change, and change is hard for everyone. So finding ways to communicate what has changed and where the most information or most important information that internal audiences are looking for will help that process. Providing regular communications either through emails or blogs is very helpful. Doing an internal launch where you can collect feedback before you go external live. And finally, and this is something that I think institutions neglect a little too much, is post-launch stakeholder celebration. Normally, by the time we get to a website relaunch, everyone's so tired that they just want to move on to the next project. But a website redesign relaunch successfully done is a major accomplishment, and finding a way to celebrate that in some way on campus is important. All right, moving from project to process. This quote comes from Ben, our creative director. We are the gardeners of a vast evolving ecosystem during a hot, persistent summer, and our gardens need tending to. This is the idea that, in some ways, maybe your next website redesign can be your last large-scale capital investment. Normally what happens is that institutions view this as something to be done every 3 to 5 years, or 5 to 10 years, depending on the institution. And it's a capital expense. They find X number of dollars to put to this, after which the budget runs out or the budget shrinks entirely. And I think that this is unfortunate, because we are in a day and age where your website should be something that is focused on for continuous improvement. So maybe this is the possibility, a good time for you to make this paradigm shift for your institution, to move to a system in which you have a regular rhythm for implementing changes and enhancements to the site. So rather than a big relaunch every 3 years, you're talking about a change every quarter or every 6 months. It's a paradigm in which you start to experiment. You create variants of key page elements, you test what works best, and then based on the results of those experiments, cascade those changes down. You use analytics and then figure out the why behind the what. So one of the things that I say is a lot of times analytics will indicate that there's a problem that you have to then diagnose. So figuring out how to draw insight from data is part of this paradigm shift. And finally, and this is something that we all talked about when we began design for websites 20 years ago, this idea of user-focused design. So we come back again to the basics, basing your decisions on what will engage and serve your target audiences, not basing your decisions on internal politics or individual preferences, but really focusing on the people that you are trying to serve. All right, Mallory, I'd like to invite you back, please, to talk about some resources.
Absolutely. Thanks, Voltaire, for leading a really interesting and informative session. We've had some great conversation taking place in the chat rooms, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of that with you. Folks, right before I cover these resources, I do want to remind you, now's the time to send in those questions. So through the Q&A panel, the chat room, or on Twitter, get those in, and we'll ask Voltaire what you're dying to know in just a few moments. Vol, I appreciate how much you covered some really important resources like myth-busting, surveys, the Gettysburg RFP. I've shared a link out in the chat room so folks can access that. There are two other really awesome resources on that page too. First, the 3 design trends for 2018. Our creative team is always looking for new innovations, in aesthetics and process, and whether that change is grounded in user needs, market opportunity, or pure curiosity, they're always looking ahead. So we put our UX designer and content strategist heads together to identify the 3 design trends higher ed should pay attention to this year. And we also created a redesign checklist to help start you on the right path for a successful project. So you'll find both of those resources on that landing page. And then we, of course, would love to explore a partnership. I am always available to just bounce ideas around. Some of my most enjoyable moments in the day is when I'm having phone calls with folks like you, and we're just talking about challenges and goals and different opportunities and brainstorming. So I am a resource for you. And I would love to explore what potential partnership opportunities might look like. So I will send out some info in the chat room if you're interested in going down that path with mStoner. And of course, I mentioned at the top of the webinar, but please don't forget to fill out our quick webinar survey. I just sent that link out in the chat room. And if you could spend 3 minutes doing that, we would so appreciate it. All right, Vol, let's move into Q&A. And I think this question is really difficult to answer, but I'm going to throw it at you anyway. How do you figure out who the right partner is for your institution? Because there are a lot of choices out there.
Yeah. I think the place to start is to figure out what you need your partner to be able to bring to the table. One of the things that I read recently was this, and I can't remember the group that put the report out, is this idea that over time, the number of staff people and the level of sophistication within colleges and universities has increased. And I think that that's absolutely true, and that's absolutely great. So internal web teams or internal communication teams are much more well-resourced than they used to be. And so I think the first place that I would start is to ask, well, what does the partner need to bring to the table? If you already have really great competencies in analytics or really great competencies in technology, then that is going to be less of an issue looking for a partner. Also, if you believe that it's funny, I think most institutions I find either feel like you have to have a lot of higher education experience, or you don't really need a lot of higher ed institution experience, and we would prefer that you didn't have that because you would have fresh eyes. So I think the way to figure out who the best partner is to figure out what it is that you need and why. So what expertise does the team bring to augment the expertise your internal team has? What sort of experience do you want your team to have, and how important is that experience in building credibility with the multiple stakeholder groups across campus that you need to meet with? And then frankly, as you and I were talking about it, part of it is really simply an emotional decision. You want someone, I tell people that in some ways, a website project is like a marriage. In a really good marriage, the years fly and suddenly you're celebrating your silver and you're like, wow. And you don't look a day older to me. And then there are really bad marriages where every moment is an eternity of holy hell. And so choosing a partner is like, in some ways, choosing a partner, right?
Yeah.
So there's that sort of ineffable, do I get along with these people? Do I like them? Do they respect me? Do I feel like we can have honest conversations with each other? Do I feel like they're going to push me to do really great work? And do I feel like I can push them? And that you don't get until you get the chance to interact with people. So
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice. I think you'll be interested. We've had some interesting conversation in the chat room around, who is actually responsible for looking at data and insights and distributing it to the right people. Because you talked a lot about how, key data and information can hit your redesign process at multiple touch points, right? At the beginning, as you're setting up your planning and developing benchmarks. Once you really get going with a partner, you'll work together to identify what your KPIs are, and setting up an analytics dashboard so that you can make data-driven decisions in an ongoing way to iterate your site. Analytics is just such a key component and thread throughout the entire piece. And what we're finding in the chat room is it's really hard to figure out who the right person is to own the data, and to make sure the right people are understanding it and receiving important information. I'd love to hear you sound off on that, Vol, and lend your opinion to the conversation.
Oh gosh, this reminds me of a storytelling workshop that we led for Lehigh University. And at a certain point, we were talking with the analytics specialist who provides all the analytics data and sends it out to multiple offices on a regular basis with like a 1 or 2 page summary. And it was just one of the most painful sorts of moments where some people are like, you do that? And she's like, yeah, I send it to you. So it's I think part of it is who owns it and who's going to do it on a regular basis. But I think the bigger question for me is, how do you change the institutional culture to the point where people value that information and feel like they either have to do something or can do something with that data? And I think that's a governance issue. I think that is an issue that needs to be talked through and then codified, because to me, it's less about who sends out the information and more about creating a culture in which that information is valued and that people are held accountable for integrating that information into the work that they do.
Yeah. Let's talk about governance a little bit more. We had a question on that. And so I think to orient everyone, there's probably 3 main governance models, right? A very centralized one where you have the center marketing communications office really responsible for a lot of the communications, more of a distributed model where maybe a number of units have their own marketing teams, and there might not even be a centralized office. And then there's a blend, right? Where you might have a centralized team, but still units who are very responsible for the content and the marketing that they're producing, but central is giving some oversight. So we understand folks are, attacking governance from one of those many different, models. Well, how would you say, in the course of a website redesign, you need to engage with all those different units, right? So are there different ways or tips that you would give to go about engagement depending on your governance model? And then, one step further, Catherine's curious, how do you actually give departments that sense of content ownership when they really should have it?
Yeah, and that's such a great question. And I think it all depends on what your plan is at the centralized level. So for me, governance has always been about balancing policy and procedure with resources and tools to allow people to be successful within those policies and procedures. Now, what I've seen lately is that there is a shift among our clients to a more centralized model where the mantra is lean and clean. So get the site
Mm,
down to as few pages as possible. Definitely have a decentralized sort of group of people who are working on pages, but then lock down the number of pages they actually can have, and lock down to a larger extent what people are allowed to do in terms of publishing. So many of the clients that I've talked with recently won't allow more than one person or one office on the campus to actually publish anything, or they won't allow people at the department level to create new pages
mm,
without first talking with them about those new pages, as a way of keeping the site small. So I think that in terms of engaging them at the beginning of the project, one of the things that I have found most helpful is actually sitting down with each of the departments that have any sort of web presence, walking through the pages with them, talking with them about what their needs are, and then working with them to slim down the number of pages that they have to what is essential. And that's the model that we used at Rush. That's the model that we used at Miami University, which was a much larger university, and that was more of a 2 to 3 year project with their team and our team, dividing up the different schools and colleges and working with different areas to get those pages down to a right size. So I
mhm.
think that there are a lot of facets to the answer, but I think it begins with conversations about their content and their users, and helping them to refocus, and hopefully in the process educate them as well.